Have you ever noticed how exhausting it becomes to maintain the version of yourself that you think others want to see? How heavy the mask feels when you've worn it so long that you've forgotten what your actual face looks like underneath. There's something profoundly tragic about living as a stranger to yourself, and yet most of us do it every single day without even realizing it. You wake up and immediately begin the performance. You check your phone and craft responses that sound like the person you think you should be. You go through conversations, editing your words, monitoring your reactions, carefully curating every expression to maintain the character you've been playing for so long that you've forgotten it's not really you. Carl Rogers, one of the most revolutionary psychologists of the 20th century, spent his life studying a simple but earth-shattering truth. The moment we dare to be genuinely honest about who we are, something miraculous happens. Freedom appears. Not the kind of freedom we chase in external achievements or approval from others, but the deep, unshakable freedom that comes from finally coming home to yourself. But here's what Rogers discovered that still challenges therapists today. Most people are so disconnected from their authentic selves that they don't even know what honesty feels like anymore. We've become so skilled at performing, so practiced at saying what we think people want to hear, that our own inner voice has become a whisper we can barely recognize. We've become strangers in our own lives, actors in a play we never auditioned for. Rogers spent decades in therapy rooms watching people slowly remember who they were before the world told them who they should be. He watched faces change when someone finally spoke a truth they'd been hiding for years. He witnessed the moment when the performance cracked and the real person emerged, often fragile and uncertain, but undeniably alive in a way they hadn't been in years. Rogers called this the difference between our real self and our ideal self. The real self is who you actually are when no one is watching, when you're not performing, when you're not trying to be anything other than what you genuinely feel and think. The real self is the person who gets excited about strange things, who feels deeply about issues others might dismiss, who has needs that might seem unreasonable to others but are absolutely valid to you. The ideal self is the person you believe you should be to earn love, acceptance, approval. It's the version of you that always says the right thing, never gets angry inappropriately, never needs too much, never struggles visibly. And the distance between these two selves is where all our suffering lives. Think about the last conversation you had with someone close to you. How much of what you said came from your real self, and how much was carefully curated to maintain their image of you? How often did you bite your tongue, swallow your truth, or perform enthusiasm you didn't feel? How many times did you say, "I'm fine," when you weren't fine? It doesn't matter, when it absolutely mattered. Rogers would say that every time we choose the performance over the truth, we abandon ourselves a little more. We send the message to our own psyche that who we really are isn't acceptable, isn't worthy of being expressed, isn't safe to reveal. And slowly, over time, we lose touch with our own authentic responses because we've trained ourselves to override them so consistently. But why do we do this? Why do we choose the exhaustion of pretending over the risk of being real? Rogers discovered something that explains this perfectly. Most of us learned very early that love was conditional. We learned that we were acceptable only when we were good, only when we were happy, only when we didn't cause problems. So we developed what he called conditions of worth, internal rules about who we need to be to deserve love. The child who learned that anger wasn't allowed becomes the adult who smiles through rage, building resentment like a slow poison. The child who was told they were too sensitive becomes the adult who numbs their feelings to fit in. The child who was praised only for achievements becomes the adult who can't rest, who measures their worth by their output. The child who learned that their sadness made others uncomfortable becomes the adult who performs happiness even when their heart is breaking. The child who learned that their needs were burdensome becomes the adult who gives endlessly but never asks for anything in return. And here's the cruel irony that Rogers illuminated. The more we abandon our real selves to meet these conditions of worth, the more disconnected we become from the very thing that makes us lovable in the first place, our authentic humanity. We think we're making ourselves more acceptable, but we're actually making ourselves more hollow. But there's something else Rogers discovered about honesty that will change how you see every relationship in your life. He found that when one person dares to be genuinely real, it gives everyone around them permission to be real too. Authenticity is contagious. When you stop performing, others feel safe to stop performing. When you admit your struggles, others can finally breathe and admit theirs. Rogers called this phenomenon psychological safety, the invisible field that appears when someone chooses truth over image management. It's like lighting a candle in a room full of people who have been sitting in darkness, pretending they could see perfectly well. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone suddenly dropped their mask and spoke from their heart? Remember how the entire energy shifted? How suddenly everyone else felt permission to be more honest too? That moment when someone says, "Actually, I'm really struggling with this," and suddenly everyone else can admit they're struggling too. This is what Rogers understood about the revolutionary power of honesty. It doesn't just free you, it frees everyone around you. Your courage to be real becomes an invitation for others to come home to themselves too. But here's where it gets challenging. To be truly honest, you have to be willing to disappoint people. You have to be willing to let others see you as selfish when you say no to requests that drain you. You have to be willing to be seen as negative when you don't fake positivity through difficult times. You have to be willing to be called difficult when you stop making everything easy for everyone else. Rogers understood that real honesty isn't just about speaking your truth, it's about living it. It's about making choices that align with your actual values, not the values you think you should have. It's about pursuing what genuinely energizes you, not what looks impressive to others. It's about setting boundaries based on your real capacity, not your imagined obligations. It's about saying, "I don't want to go to that party," instead of making up elaborate excuses. It's about admitting I'm not ready for this relationship instead of staying out of guilt. It's about acknowledging this job is killing my soul instead of pretending everything is fine because it looks good on paper. When was the last time you made a decision based purely on what felt true for you, without considering how it would look to others? When was the last time you said, "I don't know," instead of pretending to have an answer? When was the last time you admitted you were struggling instead of maintaining the performance that everything was fine? Rogers would tell you that these moments of radical honesty are not selfish, they're sacred. They're the moments when you choose your real self over your performed self. They're the moments when you choose freedom over approval. And every time you make this choice, you become a little more whole, a little more real, a little more alive. But here's what Rogers knew that most people don't understand. Being honest doesn't mean being cruel. It doesn't mean dumping your unprocessed emotions on others or using truth as a weapon. True honesty, according to Rogers, comes from a place of self-awareness and compassion. It means knowing your own feelings and needs clearly enough to communicate them with kindness, but without compromise. The person who says, "I need some space right now to process this," instead of creating drama to push others away. The person who says, "This doesn't work for me, but I understand if it works for you," instead of silently resenting and eventually exploding. The person who says, "I'm not sure I agree with that perspective," instead of nodding along and feeling frustrated later. This is what honest communication looks like in Rogers' framework. It's clear, it's kind, and it's uncompromising about your truth. It doesn't try to control others' responses, but it doesn't sacrifice your authenticity to manage their emotions either. And Rogers discovered something beautiful about what happens when we commit to this kind of honesty. We attract people who love our real selves, not our performed selves. We create relationships based on truth, rather than pretense. We build a life that actually fits who we are instead of trying to contort ourselves to fit into a life that looks good from the outside, but feels hollow from the inside. Think about the people in your life who feel most draining to be around. Notice how much you have to perform when you're with them. Notice how much you have to edit yourself, manage your responses, be careful about what you say. Notice how you leave those interactions feeling depleted, like something essential has been drained from you. Now think about the people who feel most nourishing to be around. Notice how you can simply be yourself without explanation or apology. Notice how you can share your real thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. Notice how you leave those interactions feeling more like yourself, more energized, more alive. Rogers would say that the difference between these experiences is the degree of honesty that's possible in each relationship. Where you can be honest, you can be free. Where you have to perform, you become imprisoned. But perhaps the most profound thing Rogers understood about honesty is this: the freedom that appears when you dare to be honest isn't just personal, it's revolutionary. When you stop participating in collective pretense, you help break the spell that keeps everyone trapped in performance mode. When you admit your struggles, you give others permission to stop pretending to be perfect. When you set boundaries, you model that other people can do the same. When you speak your truth with kindness but without apology, you show others that it's possible to be both authentic and loving. Rogers believed that we're all born with an innate wisdom about who we are and what we need. But society, family, culture, and our own fears layer so many shoulds and shouldn'ts on top of this wisdom that we lose access to it. We start living from the outside in instead of the inside out. We start asking, what will people think, instead of, what do I actually feel? But here's what Rogers discovered through decades of therapeutic work: that original wisdom is still there. It's been buried, not destroyed. It's been ignored, not eliminated. And the path back to it is through radical honesty about what you're actually experiencing, not what you think you should be experiencing. Are you ready to stop performing yourself into exhaustion? Are you ready to risk being disliked for who you really are instead of being loved for who you pretend to be? Are you ready to discover what's possible when you finally come home to yourself after years of living as a stranger in your own life? Rogers believed that every human being has what he called an actualizing tendency, a deep, unstoppable drive toward becoming more fully themselves. It's like a plant growing toward the sun, except in humans, it's the soul growing toward authenticity. But this tendency can only unfold in the soil of honesty. It requires the courage to see yourself clearly, to accept what you find there without judgment, and to express it with integrity. The freedom that appears when you truly dare to be honest isn't the freedom to do whatever you want without consequences. It's something far more precious. It's the freedom to be who you actually are without apology. It's the freedom to make choices based on your authentic values rather than others' expectations. It's the freedom to love and be loved for your real self rather than your performed self. And Rogers discovered that when you finally claim this freedom, something extraordinary happens. You stop looking outside yourself for validation because you've learned to validate your own experience. You stop trying to be perfect because you've discovered that your imperfections are what make you human and relatable. You stop performing love and start embodying it. You begin to trust your own instincts again. You start to hear your inner voice more clearly because you're not constantly overriding it. You develop what Rogers called an internal locus of evaluation, the ability to know what's right for you based on your own inner compass rather than external approval. Your authenticity becomes your gift to the world, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Not because you have it all figured out, but because you're honest about still figuring it out. Not because you never struggle, but because you've learned to struggle with grace and truth instead of pretense and performance. This is the freedom Rogers wrote about. This is the liberation that waits on the other side of honesty. Not a life without challenges, but a life lived from the inside out instead of the outside in. A life where your choices reflect your truth instead of your fears. A life where your relationships are based on reality instead of pretense. Imagine waking up tomorrow and for just one day choosing honesty over performance in every interaction. Imagine saying, "I don't know," when you don't know instead of pretending. Imagine saying, "I need to think about that," instead of immediately agreeing to things you don't want to do. Imagine expressing enthusiasm only when you genuinely feel it. Imagine the relief of finally laying down the exhausting burden of trying to be who you think others need you to be. Imagine the energy that would be freed up when you stop spending it on performance and start using it to actually live. Imagine the relationships that would deepen when people finally get to know and love the real you. When you truly dare to be honest, freedom appears. And once you taste this freedom, once you experience the profound relief of finally being yourself without apology, you'll never want to go back to the exhaustion of pretending to be someone else. You are not here to be the person others need you to be. You are not here to perform your way into worthiness. You are not here to edit yourself into acceptability. You are here to be the person you actually are, with all your beautiful, complex, imperfect humanity. And that person, the real you beneath all the masks and performances, that person is enough. That person is worthy of love. That person deserves to be free. That person deserves to take up space in the world without apology. Stop performing. Start being. The world needs your truth, not your perfection. Your freedom awaits on the other side of your honesty.